I find that so interesting. I actually did a double take when we showed like the Netflix performance so far in the year, because all the other companies that we cover in our world are going through such pain. The streaming business broadly seems healthy. Is that what you see, Magalie?
Yes, it is. I would say Netflix definitely has some different characteristics going on this quarter than some of their peers, and we definitely would see them as, like Ryan was saying, a safe haven through the rest of this year if we are to face increasing consumer uncertainty. I think Netflix has also really shown over the last few quarters, especially in Q4 with the blockbuster numbers they put up, that they're really separating from the pack and the others aren't able to compete in the same way that Netflix is, largely due to, I think, its content slate.
Well,
and just
let's go
Oh,
there.
yeah,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
ask, what is it that separates them from the pack? At home, we just started watching the latest season of Black Mirror. There are no spoilers on this show, ever. No spoilers on Bloomberg Technology. But episode 1 was deeply upsetting, had a very sort of big name cast. Is it just content? Is it pricing? Like, why do they stand out?
I think there's a few reasons. Content is a big one. So if we go back a couple years, a lot of the other streamers, even pre-writer strike, they had started to cut content spend in efforts to, try to aim toward profitability, given that's been such a challenge for these other streamers. So that was, kind of gave them an additional hit on top of the writer strike. And you really only get from these other streamers a couple tentpole releases. There's some great stuff, Max, Hulu, Paramount, but you don't get quite the volume. And all of these surprises that come out of Netflix continue to amaze people. Adolescence, I think, is a big one. Not many people would have expected that to be, top 3 of all time for Netflix series engagement. And that was again, I think just a piece of evidence that they've got such an amazing global content engine.
Magalie, how proactive does Netflix need to consider pricing when we think about the health of consumers around the world?
I think they have a decent amount of pricing power left to go for sure. They obviously right now are in the midst of doing a price hike that they announced a couple months ago. We just saw that flow through to existing subscriber bills in March. So at M Science, what we do is use alt data in order to look at all of the subscriber trends, which we'll still be able to see even though the company is removing the reported subscriber numbers. So what we see with pricing right now, we are seeing a hit to churn, which we think is both related to price hikes as well as some cycle in, cycle out activity from live events in Q4. But we ultimately think that's going to be temporary. And usually after Netflix price hikes, you get this temporary couple months of elevated churn relative to seasonal norms, and then it kind of abates thereafter. So we would expect it likely to be temporary. Even with that elevated churn, they still are far better than all of their peers in terms of retention.
When I travel, principally on tablet or my smartphone, I play a little bit with Netflix's mobile games. I don't really get the Netflix gaming story. I get that they're committed to it, but what do you see as the kind of long term from that business line, and what do you expect them to tell us more near term about what they're doing?
Yeah, I think the near term is probably going to be a continuation of what we have heard from them on games the last few quarters, which is that it's still a small piece of the overall puzzle. They more so are viewing it as, a franchise benefit. So can they create a game about Emily in Paris that also drives, overall engagement of the show, and therefore it's part of their whole flywheel. So I think probably near term we'll see it continue to be a small piece of the overall puzzle for them, but long term could be contributing a bit more. I don't think it's ever going to be necessarily a key driver for them outside of everything else that they have going on.
Magalie, what's the biggest threat to Netflix, and where does the competition come from?
Biggest threat, I would say, I think, content is something that they have to continue to stay ahead of the game on. Live events, I think, in terms of what they have to spend on live events, that could become a trickier part as they've gotten more involved in sports, which, we've seen that do pretty well for them. That has caused, like I mentioned earlier, some cycle in, cycle out activity. So I think that could potentially change the retention profile, but also going to be, a great tool for them to get different parts of the market that they weren't previously able to get. And then the ad tier, that's something that they've been, behind some of their peers on in terms of getting into that market. So that's something we definitely think that they should continue to ramp up. That had a little bit slower of a start than I think a lot of people expected initially, but has done well the last few quarters. Q4, they stated around 50% of signups that were choosing that ad tier. And then we're seeing that continue to grow about 10% year over year in terms of the selection rate for gross ads opting into that ad tier.